It was a bright afternoon when Mr. Alvarez pushed his cart down the supermarket aisle. The sun shone through the large windows, casting soft light on the fresh produce and colorful labels. He picked up a bag of oranges, remembering how his daughter loved their sweet taste. He paused at the bakery section to choose a loaf of bread, imagining the warm slices he would share at home. After paying for his groceries, he stepped outside, feeling the warmth of the day and the gentle hum of distant lawnmowers. He carried his bags to the parking lot, moving at a steady, unhurried pace. The lot was almost full, but he spotted his car parked near a small elm tree. He felt a sense of relief as he approached it. He had planned this afternoon for himself, a chance to rest after a busy morning at work, to read a few chapters of his favorite book, and to call his sister. It had been a long week, and he looked forward to a quiet moment. Meanwhile, 3 police officers sat in their squad car a short distance away. The vehicle's engine idled softly, and the radio crackled with a paused conversation. They had been called to check on a noise complaint earlier, but nothing serious had come of it. Now, they took a moment to catch their breath, sipping coffee. From paper cups and glancing at their phones, they were alert but relaxed, believing the neighborhood was calm. Mr. Alvarez unlocked his car door and opened the trunk. He gently placed the grocery bags inside, careful not to crush the bread or bruise the oranges. He closed the trunk, wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, and reached for his keys. As he did so, the police cruiser rolled slowly to a stop beside him. The officers turned in their seats, watching him through the tinted windows. Mr. Alvarez looked up, startled by the sudden appearance of the lights flashing without siren. He froze for a moment, his heart beating a little faster. He had always respected the police and believed they kept people safe. Yet now he wondered if something was wrong. He raised his hands instinctively, holding the car keys between his fingers. The driver's door of the squad car opened, and the senior officer stepped out first. He was a tall man with a stiff posture and a serious expression. Behind him, the other 2 officers climbed out, adjusting their belts and straightening their hats. Mr. Alvarez watched them carefully, his mind racing to understand why he had been stopped. The senior officer approached, his boots clicking on the pavement. He kept his hand near his holster, though he did not draw his weapon. Instead, he held out a small notebook and a pen. "Sir," he said, "we need to ask you a few questions." Mr. Alvarez nodded, still surprised. "Yes, officer." "How can I help you?" He spoke calmly, his voice steady, even though he felt his pulse quicken. The officer glanced at his notes. "We received a report of suspicious activity in this area. A man matching your description was seen near an unlocked car. Can you explain what you were doing here?" Mr. Alvarez blinked. "I just finished shopping. I'm putting my groceries in my car. You can check my receipt if you like." He reached into his pocket for the crumpled paper. The officer did not take it. Instead, he folded his arms. "People don't just leave their cars unlocked with valuables inside. You were spotted loitering near this vehicle for several minutes. That fits the description of a possible break-in." Mr. Alvarez felt a sting of frustration. He tried to stay polite. "Officer, I assure you this is my car. I have the title in my glove box, if you need to see it." The senior officer exchanged a glance with his colleagues. One of them, a younger officer with a clean-shaven face, stepped forward. He looked at Mr. Alvarez with mild suspicion, as if he wanted proof of ownership. The third officer, a woman, stood behind, eyes shifting between Mr. Alvarez and the squad. Mr. Alvarez opened the driver's door and reached into the glove compartment. He fumbled for a moment, then pulled out the car title and his driver's license. He handed them to the senior officer. The paper and plastic felt cool against his palm. The officer examined them, his expression unreadable. He flipped the documents over, taking note of the name and address. Mr. Alvarez watched silently, clutching the edge of the car seat to steady himself. He had done nothing wrong. He knew that. But he also knew that sometimes people judged him by the color of his skin and the sound of his accent. A bead of sweat formed at his temple as he waited. Senior officer scribbled something in his notebook. The younger officer frowned and asked, "Why do you live so far from this neighborhood? Your address is several blocks away." Mr. Alvarez swallowed. "I moved here 6 months ago. My job is close by, and the rent was reasonable. I like the quiet streets and the trees." He pointed at the elm tree shading his car. "That's why I park here." The female officer spoke up. "We got a call today about someone ringing doorbells and walking away." "Did you ring any doorbells?" Mr. Alvarez shook his head. "No, I've never done that. Came straight here, parked, and went into the store." He paused, looking at them all. "I get you check the security cameras at the supermarket. You'll see me walking straight in and out." The senior officer looked at the documents again, then closed his notebook with a soft snap. He handed the papers back. "All right, sir, you're free to go. But stay in sight while you drive off. We just want to be sure." Mr. Alvarez nodded and stepped back. He kept his hands in view as he got into the car. The officers watched him from the side of the vehicle, started the engine, slid in two, the seat, and closed the door. His heart still pounded in his chest. He glanced toward the officers through the rearview mirror. Their faces were calm now, almost neutral, but he could feel their eyes on him. He shifted in his seat, pulling his seatbelt across his chest. He remained still, waiting for the signal to leave. After what felt like an eternity, the senior officer lifted his hand in a small wave. Mr. Alvarez exhaled and pressed the accelerator gently. The car moved forward, past the elm tree and the supermarket entrance. He drove slowly out of the lot, his mind racing with questions. Why had they stopped him so quickly? Why had they assumed he was up to no good? He knew that people often judged others unfairly, but he had never felt it so sharply. He thought of his family, how proud his wife was of him, how excited his daughter would be to taste the oranges he bought. He felt a mix of relief and sorrow as he left the parking lot. Behind him, the squad car stayed parked, its lights now dark. The officers returned to their seats, closing their doors. The senior officer opened his notebook again, making a few notes. The younger officer rubbed his chin, deep in thought, while the female officer stared at the supermarket entrance. Mr. Alvarez drove home in silence, the afternoon calm restored but altered. He reached his driveway, unbuckled his seatbelt, and let out a shaky breath. He gathered his groceries and walked to his front door. He wondered if he would tell his wife about the stop or keep it to himself. Either way, the simple act of buying food had become complicated. Inside, he set the bags on the kitchen counter and began to unpack. He peeled an orange and held it close to his face, smelling its fresh scent, letting the juice spread across his tongue. It was sweet and bright, a small comfort after a tense encounter. He thought about the officers and their questions. He hoped they would learn to see people more kindly, to trust before suspecting. He hoped that next time someone like him would not be hurriedly judged. He looked at his reflection in the window and gave himself a small nod. He had done nothing wrong, and he would not let fear change who he was. He sat down at the table, savoring another piece of orange, and picked up his phone. He dialed his sister's number and smiled as she answered. He began to tell her about his day, choosing his words carefully, but keeping his calm voice. Outside, the sun continued to shine, as though nothing had happened. Inside, Mr. Alvarez felt a quiet determination to move forward, one step at a time. Mr. Alvarez stepped back as the officer closed the door behind him. The senior officer's eyes were hard, and his voice carried a sharp edge. He didn't ask if Mr. Alvarez was all right. Instead, he barked a question about why Mr. Alvarez had been in the parking lot so long. Mr. Alvarez felt his stomach tighten. He kept his hands where the officers could see them and answered calmly, "I was putting groceries in my trunk, officer." That answer did not satisfy the officer. He narrowed his eyes and leaned in. His breath smelled faintly of coffee. "You sure about that?" he asked, his tone mocking. "Some people just wander around, looking for easy targets." The other. Two officers watched from behind him, his arms crossed over their chests. Mr. Alvarez tried to swallow past the lump in his throat. He tilted his head and said, "Yes, officer. This is my car." He pointed at the license plate. It carried his name, an address, The senior officer glanced at it but kept the doubt in his voice. Lots of people lie, he said. You ever think that? Mr. Alvarez's heart pounded, but he forced himself to be polite. Of course, he said softly. But I'm telling you the truth. You can check the store receipt if you need to. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the receipt. His fingers shook as he held the paper out. The senior officer snatched it and ripped it from his hand. The paper fluttered to the ground. Messy, the officer said, tossing it aside. One of the other officers chuckled behind him. Alvarez flushed with embarrassment. His face felt hot, and he forced himself not to flinch. Listen, the officer said, stepping closer. We got a report of someone matching your description. Tall, dark hair, average build. Sound familiar? He tapped Mr. Alvarez on the shoulder. Mr. Alvarez felt the poke like a needle. I don't care what the report said. We have to ask questions. The second officer, younger and silent so far, crossed his arms. He stared at Mr. Alvarez's hands and nodded to the senior officer. That nod felt like a signal to attack. The senior officer's lips curled. So, tell me, what else do you do besides shoplift groceries? Mr. Alvarez's chest tightened. The accusation stung more than any insult. He swallowed and said, I have a job. I work at the library. He pointed to his work badge clipped to his belt. You can call my boss. Ask him. The second officer rolled his eyes. Library, huh? Must be nice. He smirked. You librarians spend all day reading books and counting stamps? He shook his head as if this proved Mr. Alvarez was making things up. Mr. Alvarez felt tears sting his eyes. He blinked them back. He knew that being polite was his only defense. He said, Yes, I'm a librarian. I help people find information. His voice was steady, but inside he trembled. The third officer, a woman, spoke for the first time. Her voice was quieter, without the mocking tone of the others. Sir, please show us your license and registration. She held out her hand. Mr. Alvarez reached into his wallet and pulled out his driver's license. He handed it to her. Studied it for a moment. Then she laid it on the hood of the squad car. She kept her eyes on Mr. Alvarez, but her expression was more neutral. He felt a flicker of hope, as if maybe at least one of the officers would see reason. The senior officer leaned against the car, folding his arms. He stared at Mr. Alvarez, his expression dark. He said, people like you cause problems. You come into town, act like you belong, then disappear. He laughed, and the other male officer chuckled along. Mr. Alvarez's face burned. He wanted to shout that he belonged here just as much as anyone else. But he stopped himself. He closed his eyes for a second, took a breath, and opened them. He said softly, I live here now. I have a home, a family. He pictured his wife and daughter waiting at home. Worried. The senior officer straightened up and replied, Well, maybe you should tell your family not to make us come looking for you. He looked at his two partners, then reached into his pocket. Mr. Alvarez thought he would take out a weapon, but he pulled out a notebook instead. The officer flipped it open and wrote something. His pen moved quickly, making bold marks on the paper. He scribbled words that Mr. Alvarez could not. Mr. Alvarez felt helpless. He wanted to ask what was happening, but he knew that might make things worse. The female officer tapped her pen on the paper and glanced at the senior officer. He looked back and nodded. She handed the notebook to him. He closed it with a snap. Then he said, All right, we'll let you go for now, but don't think you're off the hook. Mr. Alvarez exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His legs felt weak, but he stood as straight as he could. He reached for his car door and opened it. He slid into the seat, careful to keep his hands visible as he closed the door. He heard the senior officer say, Drive safe if you can. The words sounded more like a threat than advice. Mr. Alvarez turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. He gripped the steering wheel and looked at the officers through the windshield. They watched him, their faces unreadable. Then the senior officer raised his hand in a small wave. Mr. Alvarez nodded and pressed down on the gas pedal. The car moved slowly forward. His heart pounded so loudly he thought the officers might hear. He drove out of the lot, past the elm tree and the store entrance. He felt eyes on his back until he turned onto the main road. Then he looked down at his hands on the wheel. He felt shaky, thought of how he had tried to stay calm, thought of his wife's gentle eyes and his daughter's laughter. He thought of the oranges in the back seat, waiting to be eaten. He drove home without turning on the radio. The street was quiet, but his mind was full of the officer's words. He wondered if they would do the same to others who looked like him. He wondered if he should tell someone about what happened. When he arrived at his driveway, he turned off the engine and sat still. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He reminded himself that he had done nothing wrong. He reminded himself that he was safe now. He opened his door, gathered the grocery bags, and walked to his front door. He unlocked it and stepped inside. The house smelled like cinnamon from the morning's baking. He set the bags on the table and stood there for a moment. Listening to the quiet, he thought about calling the police department to file a complaint. He thought about telling his wife, but he was tired and his throat felt sore. He decided to rest first and think later. He unpacked the bags slowly, placing the oranges in a bowl and the bread on the counter. He washed his hands and sat at the table. He peeled an orange and let the juice drip down his fingers. He tasted its sweetness, a small comfort. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the sky in pink and gold. Mr. Alvarez looked out the window and felt both relief and sadness. He knew the memory of today would not fade quickly. But he also knew that the world was full of moments like this, moments that tested a person's strength. He took another piece of orange and ate it, closed his eyes and let the sweetness calm him. He decided that tomorrow he would decide what to do next. For now, he would rest and let the day's tension ease. He would remember that he had done nothing wrong and that truth was on his side. Mr. Alvarez felt a knot tighten in his stomach as the senior officer closed his notebook and tucked it away. The two other officers stepped closer, flanking him on either side. One kept his hand near his holster, the other held a flashlight even. Though it was bright daylight, Mr. Alvarez raised his hands again, palms open, to show he meant no harm. He spoke slowly. "I'm just waiting for my documents back. I didn't do anything wrong." But the officers did not seem to hear him. The senior officer leaned in, his face calm but hard. "You should know better than to stand there like that," he said, voice low. "We don't trust people who hang around unlocked cars." He glanced at the younger officer and smirked. "Right, Johnson?" The younger man nodded, his lips curling into a small, satisfied grin. He wrapped the butt of his flashlight against his palm. "That's right. You never know what someone is up to." Mr. Alvarez felt his cheeks grow hot. He thought of his wife waiting at home, of the simple supper he planned to cook. He wanted to explain again, but the words got stuck in his throat. Instead, he stayed silent and let them act. He knew that arguing would only make things worse. Without warning, the senior officer reached for Mr. Alvarez's driver's license again. He gripped it roughly and held it up to the light. "Look at this," he said, voice sharp. "Does this name sound familiar? Does it match someone who has broken into cars before?" He tapped the card against Mr. Alvarez's chest. "Because I see a lot of people around here with your kind of name." Mr. Alvarez sighed and held out his hands.
Officer."
"I swear I live 2 blocks from here. I have a job. I pay my bills. I'm not a criminal." His voice wavered, but he forced himself to keep it steady. The officer dropped the license and let it flutter to the ground. The third officer, the woman, knelt to pick it up. She handed it back, but her eyes flicked away quickly. She said nothing, as if she did not want to get involved. Mr. Alvarez noticed how she avoided meeting his gaze. He wondered if she felt uneasy about how her partners treated him. Then the senior officer barked an order. "Step away from the car. Hands on the hood." Mr. Alvarez obeyed without protest. He moved slowly, placing his palms on the cool metal. A crowd had begun to gather at a distance, people pausing to watch. He felt their eyes on him as if they already believed he was guilty of something. The younger officer shone his flashlight across Mr. Alvarez's back, fanning the beam from his shoulders to his waist. He poked lightly, as if testing the man's reaction. "Any weapons on you?" he asked. Mr. Alvarez shook his head. "Oh, no, "Sir, nothing but my wallet and phone." The officer snorted. "Phone? Lucky you. Some of your kind are armed." Mr. Alvarez's heart thudded painfully. He closed his eyes for a moment to hold back his fear. He thought of his daughter, and how he promised her he would always be safe. Now he felt anything but safe. He steadied himself on the hood, drawing a deep breath. The senior officer crouched beside him and peered through the open trunk. "Let's see what you got," he said. He leaned in so close that Mr. Alvarez could feel his breath. Inside the trunk, the grocery bags lay nestled against the spare tire. The senior officer yanked them out one by one, scattering oranges and bread loaves across the pavement. "This," he said, picking up a loaf. He squeezed it with enough force to crush the crust. The bread yielded, crumbs falling. "Duh," it aside. "Who buys this? And why so many oranges?" He let the fruit roll off his palm onto the ground, where it cracked open under his weight. Must be rich to waste food like this. Mr. Alvarez felt a wave of shame. He bent to gather the fruit, but the officer slapped his hand away. "Don't touch that," he growled. Mr. Alvarez froze, pain lancing through his palm where it struck. He bit his lip to keep from crying out. The young officer chuckled and said, "Look at him, boss. He's all polite, until we push a little." He stepped forward and ran his hand through Mr. Alvarez's grocery bags, emptying them onto the ground. Crackers, cereal boxes, a half-gallon of milk all tumbled out. The female officer finally spoke, voice soft. "Sir, you understand why we have to do this, right?" Mr. Alvarez looked at her, confusion and hurt in his eyes. She glanced at her partner's and bit her lip. Then she ducked back, leaving him to face their questions alone. The senior officer wiped his hands on his uniform and frowned. "I don't think he gets it," he said. "Maybe he needs to see some proof." He stepped behind Mr. Alvarez and pressed his body against his back. He patted him, as if checking for hidden items. His chest pressed into Mr. Alvarez's shoulder. Blades. Mr. Alvarez's breath caught in his throat. He did not move. He dared not. Felt helpless as the officer's hands roamed his coat pockets. The man pulled out a small notebook, a pack of gum, and a set of keys. He laughed and said, "All this and no stolen goods. Amazing." The officer dropped the items onto the ground with a sharp click. They lay in a heap beside the scattered groceries. The officers all stared at the mess, smirking as if they had scored some victory. Mr. Alvarez closed his eyes and tried to steady his breathing. In the distance, a neighbor stepped onto her porch and watched. Mr. Alvarez imagined her talking. Two others, telling them she saw a man being searched by police. He felt a rush of anger, not at the officer, but at how fast people believed the worst. He thought of his own life. A man who worked hard, who bought groceries to feed his family, who did nothing but live quietly. The senior officer straightened and spat on the pavement. "Don't let me catch you around here again," he said, voice low and threatening. "Next time, I won't be so polite." He pointed at Mr. Alvarez's chest. "Understand?" Mr. Alvarez swallowed and nodded. Felt tears sting his eyes, but he blinked them away. He thought of his daughter's smile and his wife's gentle voice. He could not cry here, not now. He whispered, "Yes, officer. I understand." The three officers gathered back near their car. They did not say anything more to him. They did not offer an apology. He simply turned and walked away, leaving Mr. Alvarez leaning against the hood. Surrounded by the ruin of his groceries and the harsh echo of their words, he stood there for a long, silent moment. His hands trembled, still pressed against the hood. He listened to the click of their boots on the pavement as they climbed into their cruiser. He watched them shut the doors and start the engine. Car idled, lights off, as if nothing had happened. Mr. Alvarez closed his eyes and let out a slow breath, felt battered, insulted, and small. But he also felt a quiet fire burn inside him, a resolve not to let this change who he was. Gently lifted his hands from the hood and stepped away, careful not to touch the scattered oranges or bread. He thought of parting words he might say if he could, but he remained still. He did not shout or cry out. He simply turned and walked toward the mess, bending to pick up what he could. Each piece of food in his hands was a piece of his dignity. He gathered them slowly, minding the broken rind and torn crust. By the time he stood upright again, the cruiser had rolled forward and disappeared around the corner. The neighborhood was quiet once more, as if it held its breath after watching. Mr. Alvarez felt the weight of his grocery bags in his hands and the ache in his chest. He walked back to his car, each step heavy but steady. He would finish this. Alone, he would carry these bags home and tell his wife that everything was fine. He would not let them see his wounds. He would keep his head high, even though inside he felt the sting of every insult. And somewhere, deep down, he knew that the dashcam in their cruiser had seen it all. Every harsh word, every rough move. But he did not know that yet. For now, he simply gathered his groceries, held on to his calm, and moved forward into the quiet afternoon, his heart heavy but unbroken. It was early the next morning when Sergeant Harris sat at his desk in the precinct. The room was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Pressed play on the dashcam recording from the cruiser the day before. First it looked like any routine patrol clip, but then he saw Mr. Alvarez standing by his car, hands on the hood. As 3 officers shouted and slapped his groceries onto the pavement, Harris leaned closer. He rewound and watched the officers' words again. Felt a knot form in his stomach as he heard the insults and the harsh tone in their voices. He paused the video and rubbed his eyes. Had to be sure he was not mistaken. Harris knew what he saw. The officers called Mr. Alvarez's names. They treated him like a criminal, even after they knew he had done nothing wrong. He grabbed the phone and dialed Internal Affairs. "This is Sergeant Harris," he said, his voice steady, but firm. "I need to report possible misconduct caught on dashcam. Please come review it right away." He stayed on the line, giving details until he heard the promise that an investigator would come within the hour. Meanwhile, down the hall, Investigator Reed arrived with a small team from Internal Affairs. They crowded into Harris's office and watched the footage on his computer screen. Okay. No one spoke as they saw the officers push Mr. Alvarez against his own car. They heard the way one officer sneered, "Don't let me catch you around here again." Reed pressed pause and took notes. "We need to interview everyone," she said softly, "and we must find Mr. Alvarez. He needs to know we are taking this seriously." Back in his quiet home, Mr. Alvarez sipped coffee at his kitchen table. He stared at the empty seat across from him, where his wife usually sat to share a morning cup. His phone buzzed. It was a text from a neighbor. "Did you hear? A friend of mine saw the dashcam video of your stop. It's all over?" Mr. Alvarez felt his chest tighten. He typed back, "What video? Who saw it?" But before he could send, his phone rang. It was the Internal Affairs office. "Mr. Alvarez." Investigator Reed's voice came through, calm and polite. "My name is Reed. I'm with Internal Affairs at the police department. We reviewed dashcam footage of your encounter yesterday, and we believe your rights may have been violated. We would like to meet with you to discuss what happened." Relief and nervousness flooded him at once. He agreed to come in that afternoon. At the precinct, Mr. Alvarez met with Reed in a small interview room. She had copies of the dashcam stills. "Ready?" He recognized himself in each frame, the bright oranges on the ground, the loaf of bread crushed underfoot, and the stern faces of the 3 officers. Reed slid the photos across the table and asked, "Does this look familiar?" Mr. Alvarez nodded, his throat tight. He saw the pain in his own eyes and the anger in the officer's expression. Reed spoke gently. "We want to help. Tell us your side and we will include it in our report." He told her about the shopping trip, his quiet drive home, and how he felt judged the moment the cruiser pulled up. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By late afternoon, a small group gathered outside the precinct doors. Neighbors, community leaders, and local activists held signs reading "Justice for Mr. Alvarez" and "Stop Racial Profiling." They chanted in low voices, calling for a fair investigation. Journalists from the local paper and a TV station arrived, cameras pointed at the entrance. Mr. Alvarez stepped out with Investigator Reed by his side. He felt the press and the crowd press in around him. Reed kept a respectful distance. "We will release a statement soon," she told him. He nodded and walked back inside, his heart pounding. Inside, the chief of police called a press conference. The media room was packed. Reporters clicked cameras and scribbled notes. The chief stood at the podium, his uniform crisp and medals shining. He spoke clearly. "Yesterday, officers stopped a civilian who was simply placing groceries in his car. Dashcam footage shows that our officers used language and actions that fall below our standards. We apologize to Mr. Alvarez and to the community. We have suspended the officers pending a full review." Flashbulbs lit up the room as he continued. "We are committed to fairness and transparency. We have already begun additional training in unbiased policing." Back at home, Mr. Alvarez watched the press conference on his small TV. He sat on his couch with his wife beside him. She reached for his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. He felt a lump in his throat. He had not expected an apology so soon. He whispered, "Thank you." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "You did the right thing," she said. "You spoke up." He leaned back and exhaled, as though he had been holding his breath all day. The next morning, the three officers arrived. For roll call in the squad room, the doors closed behind them, and their captain spoke in a low voice. "Effective immediately, you are off the road. You will not wear your uniform. You will not carry your badge. You will cooperate with internal affairs and the city's independent review board." One officer's face went pale. Another stared at his feet. The third, a woman, swallowed hard and looked away. They had never faced something like this before. Over the next weeks, the investigation unfolded. Reed and her team interviewed each officer, as well as the other witnesses from the day of the stop. They reviewed store security footage that confirmed Mr. Alvarez's account of going straight from the store to his car. They gathered testimony from onlookers who had paused in the parking lot. They even looked at radio logs to see if the officers had any valid reason to stop him. Each piece of evidence pointed to the same truth. Mr. Alvarez had been treated unfairly. As the investigation moved toward its conclusion, community leaders met with city council members. They called for stronger policies on police accountability and more community oversight. Mr. Alvarez attended a council meeting with his sister at his side. He sat in the crowded hall and listened as people spoke about the harm racial profiling caused. When his name was called, he stood and addressed the council. His voice was calm but firm. Said, "I asked for help. I asked to be heard. I did not ask for fame or fortune, only asked that someone listen to my story. Now I hope that what happened to me will help others feel safe." The council voted to adopt new rules requiring all officers to show body cam footage within 24 hours of any civilian complaint. They also approved funding for bias awareness training and community policing programs. Mr. Alvarez felt a surge of hope. He knew this would not erase what happened to him, but it could help others in the future. He whispered to his sister, "I think change can come." She smiled and patted his hand. Finally, Internal Affairs released its report. It called for the dismissal of the senior officer and disciplinary action for the other two. It praised Sergeant Harris and Investigator Reed for their swift work. It recommended ongoing training for all patrol officers. The city attorney announced a settlement for Mr. Alvarez, including a public apology and support for community programs. Mr. Alvarez accepted the settlement, then used part of it to fund a small scholarship at his daughter's school. He wanted to give back and to remind young people that their voice mattered in the weeks that followed. Mr. Alvarez returned to his routine with a new sense of purpose. When he walked into the supermarket, he greeted the staff with a nod and a smile. He carried his groceries with a lighter step. He felt the sun on his face and knew he had helped make his neighborhood a bit safer, a bit fairer. He thought of Sergeant Harris, who had done the right thing, and of the many neighbors who stood by him. He knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but he also knew that when one voice spoke the truth, it could open ears and minds. And that was a victory he would always remember. Mr. Alvarez woke before dawn, as he had every morning since the investigation ended. He brewed a pot of coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching the streetlights fade into the pale light of day. The air felt crisp and clean, and he inhaled, slowly, reminding himself that this neighborhood had changed for the better. He thought of the scholarship he had created at his daughter's school. and how it would help students learn about fairness and justice. He filled his travel mug and carried it to the car. As he did, he saw a police cruiser parked across the street. The officers inside waved at him, and he waved back. It was a small gesture, but it felt powerful. He remembered how just months ago he would have felt dread at seeing that car. He felt respect because he knew the department had learned from his story. On his drive to work, he noticed the billboards with the police department's new slogan, "Trust through transparency." Underneath, in smaller letters, it read, "Every voice matters." He smiled, remembering how doubtful he had been when the chief first announced the changes. He thought back to the day he gave his testimony at the council meeting. His voice had sounded steady, even though he felt fear inside. He felt proud to know that his words helped shape policy. At the community center later that morning, Mr. Alvarez sat at a long table with 5 other residents. They were planning a series of workshops for local teenagers about how to interact with law enforcement. A social worker, a retired teacher, a city council aide, and 2 young activists joined Mr. Alvarez in making flyers and setting dates. He wrote in bold letters on bright paper, "Know your rights. Build community." I outlined sessions on how to stay safe, how to ask questions respectfully, and how to speak up when something felt wrong. A mother of 2 young boys stopped by and said, "Thank you for doing this. My children will learn from you." Mr. Alvarez nodded and said, "We all need to learn together. This is for them." He felt warmth spread through him. This was why he kept going. His own fear, his own pain, had become a chance to help others. Avoid the same hurt. After the workshop planning, he walked to the nearby grocery store. It was the same chain where he had shopped on that fateful afternoon. He greeted the cashier by name. She grinned and said, "Good morning, Mr. A," the usual. Today he laughed and said, "Yes, please an orange and a loaf of whole wheat." He paused and added, "And maybe 2 today. I have guests for dinner." She raised her eyebrows playfully, and he felt at ease. He paid and left with his small bag, walking back through the parking lot. Glanced at the elm tree where he had parked months before and felt gratitude instead of dread. He unlocked his car and placed his groceries inside. As he did, a young man approached with a nervous look. "Excuse me," the young man said, voice barely above a whisper. "Are you Mr. Alvarez?" "I heard your story." The young man shifted his weight, clearly unsure. "I'm sorry to bother you, but can you tell me how you stayed calm?" I get so nervous around police." Mr. Alvarez smiled kindly. "Come, sit in my car for a moment." He unlocked it fully and invited the young man inside. He handed him a bottle of water and said, "It's okay to feel nervous. I felt it too. But remember, you have rights. You can speak calmly. You can. Ask if you are free to leave. Most officers will respect that." The young man listened intently, nodding. Mr. Alvarez showed him a pocket card he had made with a few simple lines. "Stay calm. Speak clearly. Ask questions. Record if you can." The young man took a photo of the card with his phone and said, "Thank you. I feel more ready now." Mr. Alvarez put a gentle hand on his shoulder and said, "You're not alone. It's all learning. We'll keep working to make sure every stop is fair." The young man smiled, clutching the card, and walked away with renewed confidence. As the afternoon sun dipped low, Mr. Alvarez drove home. He thought of his own family waiting. For him, his wife, setting the table, and his daughter, finishing her homework. He slid into their driveway and carried his bag of groceries inside. They greeted him with hugs, and he helped set plates of roasted vegetables and grilled chicken on the table. His daughter asked, "Did you meet anyone today?" Looked at her bright eyes and answered, "I met someone who needed help feeling safe." She nodded solemnly, then smiled and said, "You're a hero, Papa." He laughed softly. "I just told him what I learned." His wife placed a bowl of salad in the center. "You did more than that," she said. "You gave hope." He felt a tenderness in his chest. He thought back to the hurt he felt when the officers tossed his bread and oranges on the ground. He remembered the heavy shame. Now he felt light. He felt hope. That evening, he checked his email. There was a message from the city's neighborhood council. They wanted to feature him in their monthly newsletter. Another email came from a local journalist asking to interview him for a podcast about community safety. He tapped his fingers on the desk, considering ain't. He felt a quiet desire to keep his story humble. But he also felt that more people needed to hear it. He replied to both with a simple, "Yes, I'd be glad to help." As night fell, Mr. Alvarez sat on his porch swing with his wife. They listened to the distant sounds of crickets and the soft breeze rustling the leaves. He told her about the podcast. She squeezed his hand and said, "You've done so much good." He gazed at her and said, "I just spoke my truth." Looked out into the darkness, as if seeing the future. He felt the weight of one simple truth, that courage and calm could spark change. Inside his home office, he opened a notebook and began to write. He wrote about the day he was stopped, the sting of insult, the shock of relief when internal affairs called him. He wrote about the council meeting and the new rules. He wrote about the workshops he planned. He wrote about the chance meeting. In the parking lot with the young man, each sentence felt like healing, each word a reminder that his voice mattered. He closed the notebook and switched off the lamp. He walked back to the porch, where his wife was waiting. She stood and embraced him. They stood together, looking out at their quiet street. He felt a deep stillness, a peace he had not known months ago. He whispered, "Tomorrow we help more people," smiled and kissed his cheek. In the months that followed, Mr. Alvarez's work continued. He saw fewer cases of unjust stops. In his neighborhood, officers on patrol often checked their body cameras more carefully. Community members spoke up more, confident their voices would be heard. The police department held joint community events for sports games and neighborhood cleanups. Mr. Alvarez joined, handing out flyers on rights and respect. One day, several officers approached him outside a community barbecue. The senior lieutenant said, "Mr. Alvarez, thank you for your work. We've learned a lot from you." The officers around him nodded. Mr. Alvarez felt gratitude for their words. He shook hands with them, proud of how far they had come. He understood that one person's story could shift minds, change policies, and build bridges. He thought of the dashcam that witnessed his pain and brought accountability. He thought of the neighbors who stood with him, the activists who raised their voices, and the leaders who listened. He felt a quiet pride that his family would now live in a place where respect and fairness were more than just words. As the sun set on another day, Mr. Alvarez walked back home with his daughter. They held hands and she asked, "Papa, can we teach our family next?" He smiled and ruffled her hair. "Yes, we can teach everyone, together." He looked up at the sky, the clouds glowing pink. He felt hope shining, sure and steady. And in that moment, he knew that even one person's courage could brighten the darkest night.